So hey guys, this is KMC Whatever. I'm Kirsten. In today's video we are going to talk about the case of Richard Hoagland. If you hear some chewing noises, it's my dog chewing on a bone, as normal. Or let's proceed on, because he's kind of a noisy dog, as we all know. So let's just get on with this case, because it's going to be a long one. So let's get on with it. So let's talk about the backstory of Richard Hoagland. Richard Hoagland married his wife Linda in 1982. And in 1984, they had their first son, Matthew. And in 1986, they had their son, Douglas. And they eventually moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, with their two young sons. And they had a pretty average life. They lived in a large house. They went on family vacations. They had a beautiful family, perfect health. Had some minor arguments about money and their children, but eventually Richard became very withdrawn and depressed and distant with his wife, and Linda tried to help him through this, and she just thought it was due to stress at work. She didn't think anything of it, but every time she tried to help him, he would get more distant and more depressed and push further back. So eventually she just kind of said, whatever, right? Let's talk about the disappearance itself. On February 10th of 1993, Linda said, according to her, she went to take her son to school and she went to work at the medical office. She received a phone call from Richard, and he said he wasn't feeling well and that he was going to go to the hospital. When she asked him if she can come with, he said, no, I don't have time. So she just went on with her day and kind of ignored it and figured she'd see him at home. So after work, she went and picked up her son, Matthew. And when she got home, she noticed that her youngest son, Douglas, was home alone and didn't have any supervision and was home alone, really. She looked everywhere in the house for Richard. She couldn't find him. She found all of his belongings, but she couldn't find him. His passport, his toothbrush were still at home where he left them. So she called all the hospitals thinking that, he said he was going to the hospital. She called all hospitals under his name and there was nothing. So then she thought maybe he got in an accident and that he, was injured and was admitted at John Doe. So she went and double-checked the hospitals on that, and there was no luck on that. She again looked all around, couldn't find anything, found that his coat was still at home. In the middle of February, you would take your coat if you're just gonna leave. And his coat was still there. Eventually, she called the police, and that's where the investigation happens. Let's talk about the investigation itself. So Linda stated that Richard had told her that he was a wanted man, and that he left town because he was going to be a suspect in an embezzlement of millions of dollars. She also remembered that Richard had been married once before her. She knew that he loved him, or he loved her, and wouldn't love his family and wouldn't just take off like he did. 1 hour after his disappearance, he called Linda, and he said that, I can't live this way anymore, and I feel like you are better off without me. So after that phone call, he hung up the phone without her saying anything. She couldn't say anything because it was just so quick. He called again and said he doesn't want to go to jail and that he's never coming back. So at this point, it just sounds like he ran away from whatever problems he had. So a few days later, his car was found at the airport. That suggested to the police that he might have gotten on a plane and flew out of the country. But when they looked into the plane records on passengers deporting, his name was not on the list. So they didn't know what to think. So on February 14th and 15th, Richard called again saying pretty much really nothing. He was just kind of chatting like everything was normal. Nothing really incriminating or any evidence on where he might be or anything like that. So after these phone calls, Linda decided to look into the phone records, and his last 2 calls on those days were from Venezuela and Aruba. She didn't really understand what that meant, and pretty much Linda didn't hear from him until May. So in May, his son, Matthew, had a birthday, had his 10th birthday, and he received a card from his dad. That the card said this. I'm gonna read my notes so I get it right. Have a super birthday. You are a super boy. I love you and miss seeing you. Let your mom help spend this money. You might want to put some away. Maybe sometime soon we will get to see each other. I bet I won't even know you. It has been so long. Mind your mother. Bye. But in July, he sent another card to his other son, Douglas, who had a birthday then. Police were starting to think that Linda was in on it and that she knew where he was. Became a suspect, which she stuck to her original story. She did not change anything, and law enforcement had been investigating Richard on a theft case. I don't know what that case is about because that is all classified stuff, but when he disappeared, they were thinking that he is the prime suspect in this whole thing. And they thought that he left with the money and that his family was gonna follow him soon. So they watched the family for a few months, in fact. So let's talk about the aftermath, or proceeding on what was happening while he was gone. When Richard left, he left with a massive debt put onto Linda's shoulders. He maxed out all of their credit cards, 26 to be exact, and he forged her name on a big, enormous bank loan. And he had the most income coming in. She wasn't getting paid much, and she had 2 boys to raise, and now she's single. And that became really hard for her. She eventually had trouble paying for her car loan, her mortgage, and eventually she had to rely on her parents to help her out. Her financials got so bad that she had to eventually declare bankruptcy. She and her boys had to move in with her parents because to avoid being homeless because it was so bad. And 6 months later, she noticed that she was being followed. Her mail was getting opened and resealing before she even got it. And she noticed that at her parents' house there were things being moved and it wasn't them doing it. So on February 15th of 1994, so like 1 year after he disappeared, her father found that her phone had a recording device in it. And to hide, she had to put all of her bills in her parents' name, which 6 months into hiding, it still did not work. She was still, and eventually in 2003, Richard was pronounced dead because he had been missing for so long. So let's talk about what was going on with Richard at the time that Linda was dealing with all of the financial issues. So after he disappeared, he went to Florida where he met a man named Edward Szymanski. I'll put the name up, I don't know how you pronounce it. But he met this man and he was getting to know this person, and when he was getting to know this person, this Edward guy told him that he had a deceased son named Terry and that he died in 1991 from a fishing accident. So when he found this out, he used the death certificate. He got a copy of the death certificate and used the death certificate to apply for a birth certificate, and eventually used the birth certificate to get a driving license. And once he made his name as Terry Szymanski, he created a new life in this town that I do not know how to pronounce, so I'll put it on the screen, but in Florida. So he's still in Florida at this point. He got remarried 2 years after he disappeared to a girl named Mary, and they had a son together. He worked at the Pasco County. He lived a pretty normal life as Terry, and Terry the real Terry was actually a perfect candidate for this theft. He had no kids and no prior marriages, so pretty much nobody really knew who he was, so he was just kind of the perfect person to steal his identity for. He got the birthday, got social security card, you know, everything he pretty much needed to apply for a pilot and medical license in 2012, and he did it again in 2014. He also used the information to register for a ownership of an aircraft in 2014. So he's been this person for a really long time, well over 20 years at this point. Let's talk about when he got arrested or caught with this. So the nephew of the real Terry was doing some family research, history of his family and stuff, and he found that this guy with his uncle's name was living down in Central Florida, and he knew that his real uncle had died in 1991, so he kind of knew that it was just kind of weird that there was somebody still living in his name. And they had, when he looked, he was even more surprised when he looked at the family lineage and found that they were the exact same. So they waited 3 years to take any kind of action with this, and they did turn him in, and Richard was arrested in July of 2016. He was charged with identity theft. He pleaded not guilty. Mary, his wife Mary, had a question about what was going on. He had an explanation for everything, so of course she kind of believed him. But pretty much the family was very crushed and hurt that he would do such a thing to their deceased loved one, and he denied everything and stuff, and he eventually did tell them his real name after they showed the death certificate of the deceased Terry, and he was held on a $25,000 bond. They tried to charge him with unpaid debt and divorce proceedings and hosts of previous charges for his disappearance, but they didn't stick. The statute of limitations had been expired, and the official affidavit for everything was lost. No one could find it. So eventually these did not stick at all. So he was charged with stealing a dead man's identity, and Linda's lawyer thought that he could sue him for unpaid child support. So her lawyer was trying to get $2 million of unpaid child support and any other kind of like things, assets or whatever. The charges of like unpaid debt and all that kind of stuff didn't stick. The only thing that stuck was that identity theft. That was the only charge that stuck with him, and whatever. And when he was asked why he disappeared, he said that my family issues with the wife and the kids, so he had to do it. Happened 23 years later, and how Linda and the kids found out that Richard had been found. So Detective Anthony Cardillo, I believe is how you pronounce it, had called Linda and asked if she knew of Richard Hoagland. She of course said that yes, she did. It's her ex-husband. And the detective told her that he's in custody for identity theft of a dead man. He was being charged in Florida. Matthew, his oldest son, 33 at this point. Now, he is 33 years old. Him and his mother have very bitterness towards him disappearing and everything like that. They both can't understand how he can leave his family and just not care. Matthew became the most stable in the family. He has a family of his own, and he wears his dad's ring to remind him of what not to do as a father and a husband. As for Douglas, had really big issues because of his father's disappearance. He started self-medicating for all the anxiety that his father had put him through, and he got really addicted to things, and I think he even spent some time in jail because of his addictions. Linda had moved on and she got remarried, and she is enjoying her new life and being a grandmother to her grandbabies. And February 16th of 2017, Richard had pled guilty to identity theft. He was stated to spend 2 years in a federal prison and then sent back to Indiana May 10th of 2018. A judge granted Linda and her kids $1.86 million of unpaid child support. But they believe that they will never see that kind of money because of Richard's tie-ups and assets, because he's getting a divorce from Mary. I sure love criminal cases and stuff like that. Something I like to do behind the camera. I read a lot of articles, I watch a lot of shows, I'm into that kind of stuff. So if you're into this kind of stuff, give this video a thumbs up as well, and comment down below your thoughts on this case or what you would like me to do next. I'm open for suggestions, and subscribe to this channel so you get more content like this one or other things with the other two in it. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. I've already said that like 10 times, but we're gonna continue on with this. So we'll see you in the next video. Bye!